Have you ever got the feeling like you were being watched? Perhaps you were out in the forest or alone in your bedroom, and the next thing you know, it feels like someone is there, like someone is watching you, but there is nothing around. Well, there might be something to that. You see, it's a survival instinct that we developed through thousands of years of evolution. And you see, our ancestors at one time were chased by predators. And so over time, we developed the ability to sense when a predator is near. Now, the Native Americans, they looked at the feeling of something watching you as bad, as negative. And a lot of times these are associated with walkers. Now, this story takes place in Washington State. There was this man named Bob. Bob said he was going to go spend a couple days up in the Cascade Mountains in this cabin. Now, to get to this cabin, he said you would have to drive a ways to this parking lot. There was a trail, and you would have to hike this about 2 or 3 miles, and then there would be the cabin. So, he said he drove his car there, and he parked. He gets out, he gets his gear, and he starts hiking this trail. He said as he was hiking the trail, he started to get the feeling like he was being watched. And he couldn't shake it. But the closer he got to the cabin, the more intense it felt. Then he started to hear crunching sounds, like footsteps, making its way through the woods around him. And he felt like something was following him. But every time he would look around, there was nothing there. And finally, when he got to the cabin, he said he felt like the most intense fear, like something was looking at him. But there was nothing there. So he goes inside the cabin, and he gets settled in. And he said later that night, he started to get tired. So he goes and he lays in his bed. Well, next to his bed, there is this very large window. And he said out of the window, you could see the forest. At about midnight, he starts getting this feeling like he's being watched again. And he said it felt like something was right outside his window. But as he looked, there was nothing there. He said that's when he started to hear these scratching sounds on the window. It was just like a light fingernail hitting the glass. He said this went on for about 4 or 5 minutes. But as he looked out the window, there was nothing there. There was nothing but the woods. And he said the feeling got so intense that he was being watched, he had to get up and turn on some lights and, have a drink to calm himself down. All night long, this kept happening. Said in the morning, he was so freaked out, he decided he was going to leave. As he goes outside the cabin, around to where that window is, he said there were a set of very large footprints, and they were leading directly to a tree near the cabin. And he said they just ended there. It was like whatever this was that was watching him had went up into the tree, but there was nothing there. Now, this next story takes place in Ohio. There was this boy named Branton. Branton said when he was younger, he had visited his grandfather, who lived in Sedona, Arizona. Well, he said about the third night of him staying at his grandfather's, he was asleep in the spare bedroom. He could hear his grandfather snoring, and he woke up. We said he started to get this feeling like he was being watched. And that's when he said he heard the front door open. And then he began to hear a set of footsteps making its way into the living room, down the hallway, directly to his bedroom. And then, before his door opened, he threw the covers over his face. And then his door opened, and the footsteps came into his bedroom. Now he's sitting there under the covers, he's shaking, he's scared, but he could hear stuff walking around his bed. And in the other room, he could still hear his grandfather snoring. So he thinks to himself, either I can just let whatever this is get me here in my bed, or I could get up and try and fight this. So he rips the covers off his head. And as he looks out over his bed, he said there were 3 entities standing perfectly around his bed. So about 4 feet tall. They were completely pale white. They had no nose, no mouth. They had these solid black eyes. And they were just standing there, staring at him. He didn't know what to do. He just stood there, kind of frozen in fear. So the next thing he knows, his body kind of locked up. He couldn't move. And he started to feel himself lift off the bed. And the next thing he knows, he's moving off his bed. And these 3 beings are following him out his bedroom door, into the hallway. As he's going down the hallway, he hears his grandfather call his name. And he's like, are you okay? Is everything all right? And that's when, whatever this was, it dropped him. And the next thing he knows, he was on the ground. His grandfather's coming out of his bedroom. And it's like, hey, what are you doing on the floor? What's wrong? And he's like, grandfather, something was trying to get me. Something was trying to get me. That's when they both look at the front door. and it is wide open. So he tells him, just go back to bed. It was a bad nightmare. But he could tell whatever it was had bothered his grandfather.